How do we make and multiply disciples around the block and around the world? With hosts Doug Lucas of Team Expansion, Lee Wood of One Body Church, John Hirima of Big Life, Roger Shull of E3 Partners, and special guests from around the world, we'll explore how believers can come together to make more disciples. Welcome to the More Disciples podcast.
All right, here with another episode of the More Disciples podcast. I am one of the co-hosts here, Roger Shull, along with Lee Wood.
Hey, everybody.
And Doug Lucas.
Good morning.
And filling in for John Hirima for, I think, the second time, we have Forrest Head.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Glad to be back.
For today, we have something that we've never done before. We have not just one, not just two, because we've done that before. We have three guests today. Chris and Chris are all joining us. So, Doug, why don't you introduce them to our listeners?
Welcome, guys.
Glad to have you. And of course,
thank you.
Big hats off to Brandon and the crew for expanding the studio so we could fit these guys into the recording studio today. These guys are close to my heart because they serve not only with our org, but the greater kingdom. And they really do have a kingdom view. Chris Villwalk served for over a decade in the Balkans before finally getting this idea that he could perhaps use media as a way to expand the top of the funnel to be able to meet more people in a bigger way. And at the same time, one of his teammates, Chris Casey, was really interested in that too, with, again, another decade in the Balkans. Had worked for a decade in North Africa, and he also had worked with a team that, in fact, probably developed the media to movement strategy first, perhaps in the whole world, I think. And so had that experience, and these guys put their head together and they've worked together. And I think you're going to be really excited to see not only the fruit that God's bringing about through this approach, but also the tools and the steps that they've kind of stumbled into and now they want to share with others. So Chris Villwalk is a great place to start because he's kind of acting as that hub for now all of South Europe. And I love it the way he's got this mind to be able to multiply not only disciples and not only groups, but now multiply hubs to be able to serve other parts of the world. So it's really a fantastic group. And Roger, I'd suggest we start with Chris, kind of to give maybe a 30-second intro to himself. How about that?
Yeah, that sounds great. So Chris Villwalk, why don't you introduce yourself? Just say kind of how you started getting the movements and then the media to movements and how you met and the other Chris.
Yeah, sure. Hey guys, it's good to be here. Thanks for the honor to be able to share with you. It started with Doug. I was doing youth ministry in America and poolside conversation with that guy. And 2 weeks later, I know I'm going to the Balkans and some country I never even heard of. And 7 months after that, I find myself, me and my family there. And we've been we went there with the purpose of making disciples, church planning. That's always been the heart. It was pretty slow going for years, but we tried all kinds of things from starting a business, a nonprofit, humanitarian work, flood relief, English conversational classes, translating Bible. Anyways, whatever we could to get in front of as many people as possible and get to Jesus as quickly as possible. And so I would say that's a nutshell of a little bit where we came from, and that's our heart. We just want to, like all of you on this call, make disciples.
And guys, flood relief is really important, but let the record show it was a soccer game that we were there for the weekend. And Chris actually got the assist and I actually managed somehow to put the ball in. And then he made fun of me for how long it took me to get the shot off. So just let the record show.
Man, I teed that thing up and it took you like 8 minutes just to kick it like this far over the line. But Doug, you did do it and well done.
And we won. How about that?
We did.
All right. Great. Well, what about Chris Casey? Why don't you introduce yourself and say how you got involved in movements and how you met these other guys too?
Yeah. I left with a team from the States here in 2009 with the goal of church planning movements, even though I'd read a book about it, didn't know exactly how that was going to go. Learn language, learn culture, go through all the struggles. And another worker on the field offered a training, Disciple Making Movement training. We went through it. And of course, at the end of that training, who else are you going to train? And I think by the third or fourth time we trained somebody else, that DNA started to click and nothing else was working. And so we just put all of our eggs in that basket and saw a little bit of fruit. And then a meeting where we actually had some locals worshiping in our office and, in their own heart language, singing, praying. But looking out our window, which overlooked the walking street in our city, and just thousands of people on a Friday night walking up and down the street. And I thought, this is great. We've got this little group, but how can we get the rest of the masses? And just ended up putting all of our eggs in the media basket as that lets us sow seed even further.
Awesome. That sounds great. Why don't you give us your introduction as well, how you got involved in movements and how you met these other guys?
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you for inviting us on the show today. I went to the field in 2005 and I was in North Africa. And so a similar theme, we're trying to do church planting movements, although we didn't bring a ton of experience of already having done that. So we're kind of grabbing at everything that we could to get out there to share with people, finding a lot of barriers. And then for me, I read a book that mentioned movements and it got me going in terms of being interested in the fact that there could be movement among Muslim people. After that, we were blessed to have David Watson come over and do some training for us, which really fast forwarded us, really equipped us and got us very hungry for trying to pursue movements. And then right around that same time, the team, another part of the team was pioneering, trying to get the message out to, as Chris said, all the masses and the people out there that we simply couldn't get to. We were also moving forward in faith that God is working on people out there. We just need to find them. And so then I served in that capacity as a multiplier, connecting with people, trying to disciple them for years. And then we transitioned back to the States to work more full-time on media. And then going through some debriefing time, a friend just casually mentioned Chris Casey to me, and that was kind of the open door for us to start doing some coaching and some things together.
Man, I'm super interested in this subject. I don't know if you guys know, but media to movement and the redemption of virtual spaces as both access and growing and connecting in proximity and language with one another. So I get to lead the North American region for 2414, and everybody on here co-labors around that as one of those 32 regions. And one of the things that we're starting to do is recognizing the cities where we actually have disciples and churches and actually functional city churches and a DMM, but also where it's not. So I'm fascinated by how we can actually use media to movement, both to strengthen, to think about where it actually is and actually to go to where it's not, and utilizing stream agnostic websites to connect to actual people and churches in places, and to do that not just in a North American context, but in language like Africa as a parallel stream. We want to pursue that in Africa and Central Asia. So I think you guys are going to be able to bring that to clarity on this call. So my question around that, and maybe it's to Chris or to whoever wants to share, can you launch into and maybe like illustrate how we can function that way in virtual spaces of actually obeying as in a physical place, but actually modeling that in a media to movement strategy to both have a growing and a going strategy via media to movement? And hopefully you understand my question, can speak Lee enough to address it. Thanks, guys.
That's a Chris Villwalk question, isn't it?
With the basic of what it is, and maybe just kind of narrow down a little bit further, and please ask prodding questions if there's gaps. And so just wanted to share my screen, and here's kind of a basic overview of what it is. So it's the strategic use of digital media that identifies spiritual seekers online and then connects them with disciple makers offline. Disciple makers then will walk with seekers on their journey toward Christ, equipping them to reach their family and friends with the gospel in such a way that those family and friends go on to do the same. Okay, so media to movement is, to be clear though, it's not just about the media part. It's not simply about using digital marketing to accelerate some videos and getting some videos out there. It's about having a plan for using digital marketing to accelerate disciple-making movements. It's all about the offline, not accelerate for the sake of speed, but accelerate for the sake of expanding the kingdom and so much as it depends on us, as quickly as possible for his name's sake. So it's not about the media, though we are utilizing that. It's more about the movement, right? It's about kingdom workers being equipped in a new way to run after a God ordained movement in their culture and in their context and beyond. And for a real long time, many have had a digital strategy, right? And then we also have a on the ground strategy. But in my experience, those two haven't really been connected so much. They've been more siloed. Well, media to movement is about having the air and assault and highly integrating those. It's the Air Force and it's the ground troops that communicate in a high level. And so we have heard about this approach from a team in North Africa and then started saying, hey, they're seeing generational stuff in their context, and then can we see it in our context? Before I get maybe into some of our story, if that would be helpful, do you want to kind of take a stab at some of what does that look like? You know, the second part of Lee's question with from the online to the offline.
Oh yeah. So how we get from click to coffee shop? Usually it starts with a seeker who's kind of open, spiritually open. You know, we're trusting that God is drawing people as he has said in his word, that he's at work. And so the effort and the hope is to find those people and to use the tools to do that as good as possible. So it starts with that seeker using social media, because so many people are on there around the world, even in places where you don't think it is. They see an ad with a hook video in it, for example, and because they're spiritually open, they click on the learn more link, which takes them then to a specially crafted landing page with even more video to kind of keep feeding them. And so then the person being spiritually open, they go ahead and consume that. They're on some sort of a journey, and this is a step on their journey. And then after they consume that content on the landing page, there's an invitation on most of these landing pages to talk with somebody when they're ready to go further. So this person being at that point will say, clicks on that button, they're ready to talk and learn more beyond what the media has given them. And so once they do that, there's someone on the other end as a responder waiting for that response, trained and ready to respond in a way to help this person take a few more steps until they're ready to go offline. And when that point comes, then that digital responder will indicate inside a system that we're using that this seeker is ready to meet. Their information is then given to a disciple maker who calls them up on the phone, makes a connection, and makes an appointment. And then now you're in the coffee shop, ready to start this discipling relationship that will move at the pace that the seeker and hopefully others with them would like to go. That's one way that this can play out.
I'd just like for you guys to share quickly what your journey was like before. So I don't know, again, that's Chris Casey and Chris Villwalk. What was it like before you did this? And I kind of know a little bit of that story. And then what's it been like now that you're trying this in terms of just encountering people?
Going to a country where there was about 400 known believers in the whole country of about 4 million. It's a pretty wide open harvest field, but what tools are going to work? How do I get in front of people after you learn language and understand culture? We tried anything and everything to get in front of people, to get to Jesus as quickly as possible, to see if they were open. And that included, the normal things, English as a second language, doing flood relief like we talked about before. We did goat farming and raspberry farming just as a way to provide jobs for people. Just you name it, Bible translations. You built great relationship and did great things. I think that God blessed the Lord and blessed the people that we were working with, but it was just so hard to find somebody that would be interested in really going deep and talking about Jesus. And so, yeah, it led us to think outside the box and to try anything. And then, like Chris said, when we heard about this team in North Africa, we thought, let's give that a shot. And we did. We worked at doing a soft launch, and we're pretty excited about the results in that first 20 days. And like we say, in the first 20 days, we had more spiritual engagement with seekers than we did in 10 years combined for both of us. And again, that didn't lead to a movement, but it led to talking with people about Jesus and actually meeting face to face with some and mailing out Bibles. Like, I lived there for 10 years. Nobody had ever asked me for a Bible. In 20 days, we had 10 people that wrote and actually wanted to get a Bible. And so that was enough for us to say, let's go at this full speed.
Yeah, you got to recognize that piece, guys. 10 years, 20 days, where God's at work at, like that's got to be That's massive. But thank you, bro, for that labor of love like that, for just to highlight that willingness to spend and be spent for Jesus. Thank you.
And how did it go after those like 20 days? Like you got people you're mailing the Bible to, you say we want to go all in. What did that look like versus what you guys have been doing?
Yeah, well, I'll go for it, Casey.
I was just going to say it got super easy and everything went great.
We were with you till then, bro.
Yeah. No, it was, our plan was actually to do the soft launch for 30 days, but the attack came and actually we had to shut it down at 20 days. We had so many responses. Our lady that was doing the digital responding said, I can't do it. It's too hard. There's so many things outside the spiritual things that don't want me to do this. As soon as I get on the computer, something bad happens. My computer shuts down. I get a headache. My son calls with horrible news, and we actually had to shut it down at 20 days. And so it took some systematic, hey, how do we do this? How do we cover these things in prayer? How do we have backups? And so we spent some time, months, getting ready to launch it full time.
I think one of the things to keep in mind is that we went to the field as disciple makers, trying to make relationships and connections. And we didn't know anything about social media. We didn't know anything about this tech stuff. And so we actually spent probably like 6 to 9 months just trying to learn this and then launch soft launch. And so the idea is would we see anything with this? Does it hold any merit for our context? And after that results, we said yes. And so then our little team spent the next 6 months trying to build out systems to run this for the long haul. We were sold, and now we're going to give this a go full time.
Well, one thing I love about this is that I know you guys have poured into some people that I know, and we're already starting to see uptake, exactly like you're talking about. People coming in at the top of that funnel that Doug talked about right at the beginning of the show, and then being able to filter through that. It reminds me, at one time in my life, I had an opportunity to do a lot of offshore fishing, and we would just go to places where we knew and had reports where fish were being caught, but they're under the surface. You can't see them. And so one of the strategies we would use is you actually throw bait in the water. Right? You call it chumming. You throw bait and you put this wide area of bait in the water, and it begins to call the fish up to it. And instead of it just being the theory of the bait on the water, you actually have fishermen on the boat that are putting the lines in the water with live bait in order to catch the hungry fish. And that's what this reminds me of here. And it's a great strategy because we're putting it out there. We're filtering for persons of peace. We're filtering for seekers. We're filtering for believers that the Spirit is also working into, calling them into disciple making and multiplication as well. So as you've gone into this, how have you been able to distribute this strategy, beyond North Africa and the Balkans and places like that? What kind of response are you getting from people, and what would be some first steps? Somebody listening to this, how do I engage in media to movement? So what are some simple first steps that we can begin to take and others can begin to take to begin to implement this strategy? Do they get in contact with you guys for training? Do they start a simple website or way they post up social media? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think in our story, we were just thinking our context, our country, maybe a couple cities, but the Lord started opening doors to neighboring countries, other local churches and and other teams on the ground that heard about how the Lord is using this media to movement in our context. And so it's one of those things when you sense the Spirit going, you can either throw the sails up and go where the Spirit leads, or you don't have to, right? The choice before the Lord. But we threw up the sails and we went. And so we began coaching other teams in this same process. And one thing I just want to toss out there, when you mentioned, it was a great illustration with the bait and throwing a bunch out there. I think one of the things, there's a stat out there that says that 2% of the population is seeking no matter where you live in the world. And the thing when we went, we were fishing with a fishing pole, and I could only catch one fish at a time that way. And it seemed like the 2% aren't out there because I can't find filter at such a high level. But this approach helps us to now fish with a net and throwing a whole bunch of bait out there. And that's really helping us to find the 2%. And so we are finding people that are saying, teach us how to pray. We're finding people in first conversations that are saying, will you tell us what it means to follow Jesus or how to read the Word of God? And so it's really upticking and accelerating. And so being on the field for so long with such few results, And by the grace of God, we lasted. And then there's other teams that are saying, could you help? Well, then in our story, we said, sure, well, we've received this system. Why not pass it on to others and help them? And so now what we're doing is, as teams reach out to us, we do have a coaching process. We found that there's a difference between just our training and those actually implementing to actually being coached. And so to the tail end of your question, and we could dive into it more later if that would be helpful, but we do walk people through 2 to 3 month coaching process of how, if you don't know anything, we'll walk you through the entire process from nothing to fully launching a meter to movement in your context.
Yeah, one thing I'd piggyback on that, but you guys had did the hard yards of attempting to obey and to train others from your households in some of the most difficult places in the world. And then from that juncture, like you were practitioners, like you were going for it. And then you discovered here's another way of access and actually to be able to go widely, but to connect to other people in proximity by language in those places. So Casey, when you talk about that, could you, from that visional place of like regions where we can so broadly, we can geo-target with these things, but we can connect more locally at the pace of relationships with people. So if you can take a stab at that question as a part of media to movement questions and maybe tell some stories about how you're actually doing that, that would be helpful, man.
Yeah. As we work with other teams now, everybody comes in with it and talking about how hard their soil is. I think everybody's soil is hard in different different regions for different reasons. And it feels a little bit like we're Santa Claus getting to gift something that was given to us to these folks, and the hope that you see in their face when it's a blast, honestly, at this point in the ministry to be having this much fun. Our context was hard soil. There was a neighboring country that was super hard soil. They came and asked if we could help them. We got them launched. Without getting into the geopolitical stuff, there's a section of their country neighboring ours that has our people group in it. And we say it's like tough soil with concrete on top. This place has like a layer of titanium. I mean, we've tried for a decade plus to go in there, do prayer stuff, find a single believer, single church, nothing, no workers, nothing. And we had been running ads there for 9 months, Chris? And just getting
closer to a year,
just dripping stuff in there for a year with nothing. This other team felt called by the Lord to reach out, even though it was kind of an enemy territory. They run an Instagram ad asking if somebody wants a Bible. This guy responds, and 2 years previously, he had a dream of a glowing man and thought it might be Jesus, but didn't know. And so he said, hey, can I get that Bible? Mailed the Bible to him. He received it. And basically it confirmed to him that was Jesus. And he realized that he needed to give his life to Jesus and turn away from his former religion. Truth is, he was about 2 hours away from any other believer, any other work, but he saw an Instagram ad and reached out. God had been working in his heart for 2 years, literally visiting him in dreams. And had he not been able to pick up his phone and see an Instagram ad and then get connected, and it took about a month for the people to get down to him because of COVID and some other stuff. But by the time they got to him, he was already saying, hey, there's water, let's go. And they walked him, creation to Christ, and he's now walking with the Lord and hungry to share with his 4 brothers and family around him. So first one in this region that we've been praying for decades for. And because he saw an ad on Instagram.
I'm about ready to have a spell, get excited, man. I'm about ready to shout. So that fires me up, man. Hallelujah.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Amen.
Roger, what do you think about all that?
Well, what I heard that you said that I really appreciated is that if you know nothing, you can still do it. Because I actually don't have any social media that I use, and I visit maybe 1 or 2 websites when I get on. So I think that's really really awesome. Yeah, I actually, one question that I did have, because I was talking to, this is a while ago, a friend who was working in country that has a bunch of other faiths that are hostile to Christianity, and even like they would do stuff like this where they would say, hey, we'll send you a Bible, and they would come and deliver it in person. But they said they had to be very shrewd about it. So how they did it is they wore a jacket that looked like they were a delivery man. They would give the person a Bible and see if they're actually interested or if they're just trying to figure out where the Christians are so they can persecute them. And when the person seems interested, they take out the delivery jacket and say, hey, I'm actually a Christian too. Let's talk. And that was kind of their way to get around that. And it sounds like you guys are working in very potentially hostile locations where persecution can be rife. Like, is there any way that you guys have needed to sift through that, or in the process where it's like we really need to discern that, or has that not even been a problem? Does this kind of cut through all that just with what you guys are doing?
I think you could probably talk about that since you've been incredibly hostile.
Yeah, we would try to have our digital responder as a person sort of filtering on the front end as much as they can, and then they would flag inside the system. So we downstream, down funnel would have an idea of that. I can think of a couple cases where people came from an extremist background, so we were able to let the multiplier or disciple maker know that, and then they, with their wisdom, handled it a bit differently. They met in a different location, which was mutually acceptable to that person, to basically have kind of a more even ground to discern, is this legitimate or is this something different? Or reporters, others like that have sometimes tried to get in, but praise the Lord, it hasn't caused any major breaks in the system up to this point, but we're always kind of keeping our radar turned on to that.
While you're talking there, I'm thinking about you because you've kind of made it part of your quest to figure out a sequence for maybe coaching somebody through this. You kind of walked along that sequence with respect to, I think, a mission field perspective. But I wonder if you could sort of imagine switching hats. Let's suppose you're talking to a disciple maker in North America, because part of our audience, frankly, is going to be focused on North America. So let's don't ignore them. Can you imagine how a church or a disciple maker here in North America might utilize this approach, maybe on a lower key, more dynamic basis than something like you guys are doing, which is, super like organized sometimes? How would a person do this on an organic basis, but utilize some of the same principles?
It's pretty scalable, I think. There is big organized system, and then someone on a smaller scale could also, for example, a church, they could create a website, one of the basic digital properties that you need to have, and just name it in a particular way, and have a tagline with that, a branding that maybe isn't necessarily connected to their church, that could be broad, like for a region. And if they did groundwork of having some like-minded people ready to meet them, but they could also begin to create media that is going to be really culturally appropriate and tuned in to seekers from their population. They can work the same system. They can be available to respond to them. Honestly, this is what businesses are doing a lot. And so it's just really crafting it, though, looking for that fish that wants to bite this particular bait. And so if they can build a system that will be geared around that, they can have someone ready to respond in a helpful way that gets the person offline. They could be diligent about that. They could actually work the same system in any city. I think it works anywhere, because people generally are simply using digital media for lots of different reasons and asking big questions and looking for answers in digital media. So,
yeah. So we're actually pursuing that in a North American context with the site loveoneanother.life, with the intention of geo-targeting areas and even people groups and connecting them at the local level to multiplying disciples and churches, which we're saying the same thing. So my question is on the contextualization side of that, is finding the best messaging inside or what you're sowing with. How do we craft the messaging up front? And then how do we connect better so in other words, we don't want to duplicate, right? We have eyes to see, like I know you guys, but we don't want to duplicate. We want to basically be able to collaborate and to target. Like if we're doing a lot of stuff here and we're not connected inside of that, why, if it's already there and going there, why don't we target over here? Why don't we target over here? How can we be more effective inside of this?
Do you want to mention the idea of a persona, of imagining a persona, Chris Casey?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it. The messaging thing is doing persona research. So we interviewed all kinds of local believers to figure out how they went from not knowing Jesus to actually knowing and walking with Jesus, and then found common threads and then created content around that. Another layer to the messaging is not asking, hey, like, do you want to meet somebody? But like, are you one of those that has experienced this, to help them already understand that there's a community of people. They're not alone. Even though we're more connected than we ever have been, we're more alone than we ever have been. And that's a huge messaging thing that we can say. There's other people around you that have experienced this and can walk through that with you.
Really good.
What that leads into is, I would say, a large majority of the seekers that we find have already in place barriers to physically going to where we normally would invite them to. And so we have to be better prepared and equipped to then take the message to them, which honestly goes in with multiplication strategy, because you're joining their oikos, you're bringing the message to them, letting them stay there, and then multiply from there. I think what we are, I'll speak for myself, I'm weak at. I'm usually inviting somebody into something as opposed to being willing to go into across the line into their field. And so I think unlearning some things in the West would probably be in order to be willing to understand these people probably either have been, if they're unchurched or dechurched, that we need to take Jesus to them. We are the church. Let's go there and multiply there. In a place where there's no churches, it's simpler. They already think we're a cult or we're something else, and so we already have to go to them. And so I think that would be a key if you're wanting to implement this here, is to figure out how are we going to go across that line to them. The messaging piece, I mean, talk to Nike, talk to Walmart. People are out there. They know how to send the message. They know how to. You put money in marketing, and they can get the message out. I think the key is figuring out how to get there.
Yeah, so that was one of my next questions, was about crafting the message. It is so important, and we see, the world doing that, and how do we best do that for kingdom purposes? So I'm glad we talked about that. So one thing we've been encountering through various social media streams is the ongoing and escalating problem of censorship through those social media streams, things that won't get posted, things that'll be blocked, and things like that. What would you say we need to do, or someone pursuing this strategy would need to think about in regards to censorship? Or have you been able to address that problem yet and run into it?
One of the things that I think that helps, well, first of all, I don't think there's any bulletproof plan. Sometimes sites and things are getting blocked because it's a moving target as for the social media companies. They're responding to different things, and they're over clamping down because of that. So that is basically a risk, a mitigated risk to work through. But you can help yourselves out, which I think everybody's pretty much agreed to do, is keep our messaging positive. So instead of having a negative turned message, have basically a focus on the wholly opposite.
That's cool.
Would you like to have more hope in your life? Are you missing hope, or do you feel like you don't belong? Or things like that. So it becomes an attractive force for those who are spiritually open. And I think that basically not taking any targets or digs at other systems, other belief systems, are a couple of things that people can do to at least try to prevent that block. But also, teams need to be ready. Like, what are we going to do when it happens? And basically think through that risk and that possibility, so that they have a plan, and downtime is then minimized, because it's not impossible, even with the best, most intentional efforts, that something won't get flagged at some point, but many of them get resolved fairly quickly.
I would add just real quick, prayer. I mean, as DMM, prayer is one of the things that undergirds everything. I think getting into the media side, sometimes we think, well, I'm working technically here, so prayer isn't a part of it. But we've seen teams that they get blocked, and I think I could point to where we prayed and we got other people praying, and then for some reason it was unlocked. And so I think prayer is a big piece of the strategy too, and using media to get other people to pray as well.
Awesome. Well, that's about the amount of time that we have for this episode, unless anybody has something that the Holy Spirit's burning on your heart to share.
How about Roger, Chris Villwalk, to close us with just one more little story example?
This was an encouraging story of someone in a context where we had just launched into a neighboring country. And on day 2, Daniela reached out and said, I want peace, but I don't have it. And on day 45, she was baptized. And then 1 year later, we have second gen where Daniela is helping to baptize a friend. And so that's a huge success and something we're constantly, we keep seeing more and more of this. And I think going back to the ASEM, one of the deal is a lot of times these are happening where sometimes workers aren't, sometimes where they are, but sometimes where they're not. And so part of what is really helpful in this strategy is a heart that let me just follow the fruit and go wherever the Lord is opening up doors. And that's Media Movement's doing that for us. It's helping us to find the 2% in areas that we wouldn't realize. We follow the fruit and the Lord begins doing some multiplication stuff through that.
Man, I'm so encouraged by this. Thank you guys for being on here, because you're seeing Jesus prayed generationally in John chapter 17 that we might all dwell together in perfect unity, that the world might know the Father sent the Son. So we're going, we're sowing, we're redeeming that place, that virtual space to reach those that he's at work in, man. So like, I've got Holy Ghost goosebumps right now, man. I'm so encouraged, man. Like, that's an answer to prayer of being provoked unto love and to good work. So like, thank you to you guys for your willingness to spend and be spent and to put in those hard yards and to be doing this and to be sharing. Freely you receive, freely give. Mad respect. We'll pray for you. Honored to co-labor. Thank you guys so much.
You guys have a form on some website somewhere so that, security notwithstanding, so they can fill it out, so they can contact you if a viewer wants to learn more?
Yeah. If those interested in coaching and knowing more about Media to Movement, there's a website, Media to Movement, movement.org. And you could go /coaching. And whether it's evaluative coaching, if you already have a Media to Movement effort and going, or whether it's coaching from scratch, there's a form there that you could fill out.
One other story. So one of the guys, Nathan Vinton, from stuff that we're doing here, had him connect with you guys. Okay. And there has been fruit from a North American context, from beginning to throw some ads in a target area. And we're going to accelerate that. So that actually is a picture of connecting, communicating, and collaborating right there, like locally, nationally, and globally with these targeted things as practitioners. So again, thank you guys so much, and look forward to tugging on the end of the rope more and more with one another.
Super. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thanks for being on here. And for our listeners, feel free to get in touch with them. And this is also just to plug, if you haven't gone on our YouTube channel, they shared some visuals. So that were good to see. So be sure to check us out on YouTube as well. But thanks so much, guys, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
How are you making more disciples? What problems have you encountered? What successes have you celebrated? What questions do you have? Share your stories with us by visiting moredisciples.com/contact. If you're looking for next steps on growing your ability to make and multiply disciples, visit moredisciples.com to find resources, tools, and events all designed to help you make more disciples.